And now your host of Where's My Parachute? It's Steve Lemieux.
Come on, man.
You're ridiculous.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Good afternoon.
That makes me want to start a business.
There you go. Yeah, it should. Definitely should. All right. Well, welcome. We got Matt helping us out.
Hi, Steve. Good to have you
in the
back.
box.
Yeah.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you.
And I'm lucky enough to be joined by Lloyd Banks. He has a company called Banks Talent.
I do.
And Jeff Schiefelbein from Five. And we're going to talk a little bit about entrepreneurialism.
Bring it on.
We're going to talk about...
I'm glad to be here with Lloyd, too. Lloyd's
fears.
awesome.
He's awesome, man.
Yeah.
He doesn't know me very much, so that's the only reason he's saying that.
That's all right.
So far.
Yeah.
So far.
There you go. Cool, man. Well, so Jeff and I know each other, well, in a previous life, but also we're both members of the Conscious Capitalism movement. And we recently attended a conference together in Dallas. It was a 3-day conference and pretty incredible stuff. And they talk about that movement and how to have a good business, but also do good, have a purpose with your company. And so we'll talk a little bit about that and some other things. But first wanted to bring up, you and I were discussing, but one of your biggest risks in business was actually in college or out of college?
Actually about halfway through college. And I always think it's interesting. I've started and been a part of many startups, both for-profit and not-for-profit. But at 19 years old, I started working on my first company. It was a nonprofit corporation. But I was doing it as a student and also as a student organization. It's at Texas A&M now. It's called Carpool. It's a really long acronym. Caring Aggies are protecting over our lives. But in a very short amount of time, this thing that I put my blood, sweat, and tears into became known as the largest and most successful program to reduce drunk driving in a college town.
Wow.
And then after a few, and I'm not joking when I say this, recovery moments from being hospitalized after starting it, that's how hard the effort was.
Yeah.
I kind of got my health back underneath me, handed over the reins, and started a second nonprofit to take that model that was working at Texas A&M and bring it to schools elsewhere. And we launched one in Georgia called Watchdogs shortly after. And now there's dozens of programs throughout the U.S. And when I say successful, at the A&M program here, almost 19 years later, you're talking about 275,000 people have received a free ride home, not to another bar, club, or party that was non-judgmental and student-run. And so you think about impacting lives. For the rider or the person who's involved, it's pretty simple. They make a phone call or they walk up and talk to somebody and they get home. But that's where the simplicity ends, because behind the scenes you're talking about millions of dollars of liability and risk and operational efficiencies and, how do you recruit and motivate 300 people from a pool of 600 applicants? So I always joke, everything I learned when I was 19.
Yeah.
And then it took me about 12 years to realize that I had already learned it at 19 and I should quit trying to relearn it with all the stupid things and mistakes I made after that.
Yeah.
Which that list is much longer, but by the grace of God, my first thing ended up being really successful. So
That's incredible, man. I mean, that's truly conscious capitalism. That's truly starting something for a purpose, you know?
It's funny though, because people will say, and this could be in a business school class or it could be in a leadership group, they'll bring me in as the nonprofit expert. Like, Jeff's going to come and talk about starting nonprofits. I'm not a nonprofit expert. I actually don't even enjoy starting nonprofits. I think the process is a lot of checks and balances and it's pretty cumbersome. It's not my thing. But all of the business principles that made Carpool successful are what makes my current company Five successful. And it comes down to culture building, because you're creating a place where people can be like their most energetic, creative self and be a part of something bigger than themselves and have meaningful work. And then if you're doing it right, you're mostly getting out of the way and letting that happen and just creating a support structure. Carpool at A&M, guaranteed to have the founder move on, right? I had to graduate from college eventually. I did stretch it out though. And then guaranteed to have 100% turnover in its staff and leadership every 3.5 years.
Yeah.
You don't create culture before that. Good luck making it past about year 5.
Yeah, it's over.
Yeah. So I always tell people that I didn't realize that was the education I was getting, but it absolutely was about team building, culture building, and instilling in people or giving people the outlet to have fulfillment in work and to be formed by their work.
Now, let me ask you a question just for fun. So did you, we all know that nonprofits aren't supposed to make money. However, they do pay employees and CEOs and sometimes significant amounts of
I
money.
love this question.
Did you were you able to make any kind of a living throughout college?
I'm going to flip it on its head, and you're going to like this. So when I
Okay.
give speeches about starting programs and starting cultures like this and movements, I was told all the time, you know what, and especially when I was even starting Carpool at A&M, I was told, you're never going to be able to pull this off if you don't find a way to pay the staff and pay the volunteers. I certainly didn't get paid. My poor family had to pay for my DWI that I got that caused me to have these
Ouch.
moments, these gifts where I had clarity on what I was supposed to do with the rest of my college life after being a complete idiot. But I say this because not only did I not pay the people who were part of it or myself, I created a student organization, and those come along with semester dues every semester. So young men and women went through extremely competitive interview and application processes to be weeded out to the final 250 people. And then their very first meeting, they had to write a check to work for us. So
Wow.
they paid us to give up their nights and weekends to take care of other people. And if you want to talk about culture, that's a I get to come to work culture right there.
That's incredible. Now, of those 250, were they all on the weekends, or like how many rides would?
Yeah.
At the
So
peak?
kind of the logistics of it is that it was only Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night because we're still at limited resources, and you got to also go to college while you're in college, apparently. So those 3 nights from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m., you know, at the very beginning, we were already doing more rides than everybody else, but it ended up being a couple hundred rides a night, and it still goes at that clip. And you can imagine a football game weekend is even more.
Oh, yeah.
And it's even harder because now the logistics of getting around town with traffic are tougher. But a member's probably working somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 10 times a semester if they're kind of just batting the average. But some people, we actually tell them you can't work every single night of every single weekend. Like you
Right.
have to take a break.
So
I think you find that a lot.
So logistically, you have a call center that they call in, and then they dispatch. Because now there's this new fancy thing called Uber and Lyft.
We're the original. In fact, I've had Uber call me before, and they're like, "You guys did it first. Can
I
we
was
partner?"
gonna say,
yeah,
man.
no, and I think that's a hard thing about working in academia because it still is part of an A&M umbrella. It's a student
Right.
organization, so they got to work through those logistics. But knowing that, I don't think a bunch of college kids want to sit in a call center or in an office waiting for the beeper to
Right.
go off, you know, for the alarm bell on the next ride. I started by getting an apartment complex to donate a big apartment to us, and eventually we got a house donated. So you run it out of something that just feels more like you're hanging out up into the moment that the phone starts ringing a lot.
Yeah.
Then you send a guy and a girl in every car. So you have like a driver who only focuses on driving, a navigator who does interaction with the potentially drunk folks and handing them receipts about where they've been and where they're going. But what's interesting is the car dilemma. To figure out how to have cars to handle this operation, I didn't want people getting in my car. It wasn't safe. It was a college kid's car. But you can't rent cars if you're not 25 years old. I couldn't be considered a state agency because A&M was trying to kind of deal with me at arm's length because you know, this sounded like a pretty risky thing to get off the ground.
Yeah.
So I tell people all the time, I got 300 people committed at the end of the spring of '99 to come back and start be there on day one of the program's operations in the fall. But I couldn't tell them what cars they were going to have or where they were going to come from. And I can't even explain to you how difficult it gets. The catch-22s you get into about getting donated cars. And somehow I was bold enough to sit in front of a bunch of rental companies until Enterprise looked across at me and said, "We'll take a chance on you." And I ended up renting somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,500 cars that year under my personal name.
Wow.
And
you got some good miles out of that, though.
yeah, they gave
Come on.
us,
Never have to
some
pay for
reduced
it.
rate, and we still ended up spending a fortune there and became a big part of their rentership. But it's funny, when people do the how are we doing call, like the automated customer service deal, I would get about 20 of those a day from Enterprise. I was like, listen, I don't even know what car you're talking
That's
about.
hilarious.
So, but yeah, we ended up in all the programs throughout the U.S. When you think about kind of purchasing power and shared best practices, Enterprise became the primary rental car company across the U.S. So they like to have guaranteed rentership. If every weekend, you're going to have 20 vehicles for 4 days rented, that's a pretty big deal for an organization like that.
And are you still involved in that?
Mildly. More as occasionally I might go down and give a talk or help out with a fundraiser. But
You stay up to speed on it, though?
Yeah. And they're doing some neat things right now. They're actually building out a whole new complex to be an owned structure by Carpool, where the building itself is laid out perfectly for the operations, which is, now you're no longer knocking holes in old walls trying to figure out how to run lines through there. So
wow,
should be pretty neat.
And so interesting, 180-degree turn would be Lloyd Banks, who's sitting to my right. he actually served the college kids alcohol for years and years.
If they were 21.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Of course.
Yeah.
So, man, just jump in a little bit, because I know you recently exited one of your businesses, but talk about your bar restaurant experience. Kind of, did you have, obviously there's always culture, whether you create it or it creates itself, but did you have a certain culture that you were pushing for? Did you kind of let it happen on its own? Like, how did you get the feel and the folks that you wanted to come in and that kind of stuff?
Well, I spent 5.5 years at UNT getting my recreation and leisure studies degree, which is a real thing that, thank God, my mom found. She said, little math, little science, sounds like you. I said, good. So yeah, after going to UNT and I jumped in and opened my first club in 97 and had never worked in a bar, never worked in a restaurant, never done anything, just decided it needed to be done. Wow. And so I did it. And, I think back then, I don't know that I knew that I was trying to create a culture, but I was, and it's something that with mild changes I did and have done for 21 years. And the biggest thing I wanted to have employees that wanted to be there, that wanted to make money, that weren't going to give away everything to their friends because they realized giving away a drink to my buddy is not worth me losing this job that I get paid well and get taken care of. And one of the things that my employees, very few of them took advantage of, was I told them, I said, especially after years and years, I told them, I said, look, there's nobody I don't know in this town, whether they're the most important people in town or some of the worst people in town, but there's not many people I don't know. So as you're working your way through college or whatever it is you're doing, or, a lot of single moms that were my greatest employees ever, but I always told them, whenever you're ready to take that next step and do something else, yes, I will be sad that you leave, but anything I can do to help you take that next step, whether it's finding a second job, finding a full-time job, finding something that's your dream and your passion, then I'm going to help you because you've helped me live my dream, doing this.
That's an interesting thing to bring up. I think that's rare. I do it in my company. As a matter of fact, I just had one of my employees resigned, and he's going to a company that I actually introduced him to. And I'm happy for him. I mean, I'm bummed. It's never fun to get somebody trained up and things are starting to rock and roll. But I've always supported any of my folks moving on to their next. I was on the phone for 30 minutes yesterday afternoon with for a reference for a gal that used to work for me, and I just think it's so important to provide that opportunity and not. Absolutely. And I know there's so many companies out there that want to hold you down, right? Because they don't want to lose you because it costs them money, and
so short-sighted though. Think about the brand that you were creating when you did help. Somebody took you up on that. Think about who else was looking for a job and starting off or had a lot of potential, and maybe they were in a crummy place. Yeah. The way people exit is the biggest brand. Same for you, Steve. I mean, right? You're making that. Netflix has a real cool book, or a former Netflix executive called Powerful right now. And one of my favorite concepts is creating a place that you would be proud to be from. Would I be proud to have been from either one of your organizations? Right. And that's a neat brand, because holding people down, that also gets out and becomes your brand.
Well, it does, and hopefully it gets out sooner rather than later. But it's interesting that you say that, because I do get a lot of resumes, or not resumes, but people's bios, and it says, he was at this company, and at a financial services company. Yeah, it won't actually name it. It's like, and this company that really sucked, and they didn't help me move on, so I'm not even going to mention their name. Yeah. I've dealt with that with a few of my people too. They're like, I'm not putting that name in my bio. Like, why would I do that to promote a company that?
Yeah, people are like afraid to train their people because then you're going to leave. How great would it be if you were training people and they wanted to stay because you made them better?
So there's a commercial real estate company, and I won't mention the name, but that was notorious for having junior brokers, right? The senior brokers would have the junior brokers, and the junior brokers would call on clients and set meetings, and they never got to go in the meetings, and they never got any of the client interaction because the senior broker wanted to keep them as juniors. Sure. And have all the relationships. And I think that goes on a lot in my business. Yeah. And I mean, that's, that's internal. That's not the owner necessarily. That's internal, but that's the culture that they've created.
Sure.
Yeah. So
well, you can make profits in the short run. I don't care what business you're in, but there's no health in that. It's like a house of cards. It doesn't take much to make that fall. A few missteps, and you have no resilience because you weren't growing and raising people through that whole process.
Yeah. So your title is Chief Culture Officer.
Oh yeah. I made the title up, and then I found out other people had it too. So it's not that cool.
You're the CCO.
I am.
And founder or co-founder of Five.
Yep.
So I've actually visited your office.
It's pretty fun, isn't it?
And you walk in and there's something different going on.
You're either in like Silicon Valley, a marketing firm, or a daycare. People aren't sure what they're walking into.
With the hands on the wall, the daycare. Yeah.
Our awards are like high five hands, and they're all these different colors, and it kind of looks like it might be kids' art, but it's it's pretty cool.
So the company is Five, and Five is everywhere. Right. Tell me about that certificate.
Yeah, you bet. So the name Five doesn't come from how many founders. In fact, there wasn't even 5 of us on day one. The name comes from some of our favorite books, actually about culture. So Tribal Leadership is a book that talks about the evolution of a culture or a tribe. And like you go from a level stage 3 of I'm great and you're not to 4, like we're great and they're not. Then level 5 is transcendent. You're competing with what's possible. So we wanted our name to somehow epitomize like what we were striving to be in the energy space. We want to completely transform deregulated electricity decision-making, like helping commercial clients, right? So we went from a simple name to a 1-syllable name to it turned into a 1-digit name. It's not even, there's no letters in our name. It's just the digit 5, which comes before A if you alphabetize us. But then to do exactly what we said, compete with what's possible, one of my partners went and filed the paperwork, and we trademarked the digit 5. And so we have the U.S. Patent and Trademark seal right when you walk into our office for the digit 5. And that's like you're coming across the threshold into everything you're about to touch, see, and do is designed to be different so that you'll challenge, why am I doing something a certain way? Oh, it's because it's always done that way. And if I take a typical approach, I get typical results. I'd rather take an atypical approach and crash and burn. It's more fun. Or what turns out to happen most of the time is you do something really special and people appreciate it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there is that risk, right? It's like every time you step out there, you're a little nervous about what the reaction at the office is going to be. And a lot of times the reaction isn't what you expected, but then ultimately, for the most part, it turns out. I'll give you one example from us from a few weeks ago. So we've got a lot of new young employees, and we try and do a lot of fun stuff in the office and outside of the office. But one of the things we did was we were going to go do kind of a happy hour deal, and I was like, hey, Korean barbecue and karaoke. And so we went to vote on it, and a lot of the guys were voting for Topgolf instead, right? Because we had a couple of different things to vote on. And I don't remember who the deciding vote was, but I'm sure that I had something to do with some influence on it. And we ended up going out to karaoke, and I can say for sure, if you ask anybody that went, they had a blast, right? Yep. But there was also a second reason for doing that, right? So we're a sales organization. I want these guys to get up and sing in front of people. Yeah. Even though they're embarrassed, because I want them to cold call people even though they're embarrassed. Yeah. I want them to throw all that out the window and just go for it. But that was one where...
take that a step further. If you think about karaoke, like that's a nerve-wracking, painful, and you're going to have these moments where you're like, oh, I looked like an idiot. Yeah. And that's exactly what happens when you get off the phone with somebody. You're like, oh, I can't believe I said that. I looked like an idiot. But if you've just karaoke'd with somebody, then you have now a camaraderie. You had a shared experience that you don't... I like Topgolf. I think it's a lot of fun. Yeah. But it's not a shared experience so much as it's like bowling. You're sitting around and you're having a good time and having a drink. But it's not like the whole team is in there watching the one person swing the club every time and judging everything about them. You start singing, I'm going to judge everything about you. Oh, yeah. And I'll bust out some Shania Twain if I have to.
I got to tell you, man, I was pretty impressed with some of the guys.
Yeah. All of a sudden you realize there's talent in the room.
I was like, dang, that guy can sing. It was fun. It was a blast, though. No, wow. There was no alcohol served.
All right.
While you were singing.
Yes. Yeah. You got a 3-minute break in there.
There you go. Yeah. So tell us some of the stuff that you guys do.
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, we recognize that if you don't make it intentional, then it's going to create itself. You said culture is either going to be made or it's going to make itself. That's true. You have to have a plan in place. And so it starts with the idea that everybody has to rally around a common vision. We sincerely want to change our industry. We don't think that people get good energy advice because they're getting it primarily from just the salesperson and the broker, and not from the folks who actually understand the dynamics around markets and engineering and how rates are structured. So in order to change the industry, which is a pretty big goal, you got to bring in people that are aligned with that vision, and then we don't have to babysit, right? I don't want to worry about growing people into being adults. I want to hire fully formed adults that are ready to get to work. So we make it all real clear: mission, vision, values. And then when we come in, we say there are no policies in this company other than one. So we have no vacation policy, no sick leave, no expense policy, no where you work, when you work. There's certain job roles that you pretty much have to be working during the workday because who you're supporting. We say you're an adult. You do what you need to do, and we're going to support you in that. You need to take vacation on your second week. Do it. That's fine. But we're just recognizing you have a job to do. And people rally behind that. And the one rule we have is called the 8 to 5 rule. We just don't let energy suppliers buy us anything, take us anywhere, or, kind of put us in debt to them that I owe you because you took me out for a nice steak dinner or a Cowboys game. And so from there, we just start walking the walk, and people realize the open door policy isn't just a nice thing. It's that everybody from the intern to the veteran are interacting with each other and trying to figure out the best solution to something, that we're constantly educating and engaging people in a different dialogue. So whether that's education about our industry or our craft, or it may be that we're bringing in outside speakers to talk about things like presentation skills or people reading skills. I've even brought in a fireman to talk about fire safety, because when as an adult do you get fire safety classes?
Yeah.
So it's like, just invest
Stop,
in these
drop,
people.
and roll.
Yeah.
Man. Come on.
They don't say that anymore. I don't know. Now they say get out of the house.
Run.
Yeah. But all of a sudden you create, like we were just talking about the karaoke thing. That's fun. But there's a second reason for all of these things. And if you create shared experiences, and you not just tell them they're part of something bigger than themselves, but you show them how that's so, how their work contributes to something bigger, and give people tremendous responsibility, and don't look over their shoulder. Just recognize that almost everybody around you is wanting to do their best and wanting to do a good job. And there's a couple bad actors. It's probably not even 1% of the people or 2% of the people you're going to be around. Just deal with them. My job is both the fun stuff, the constructive stuff, and also it's dealing with people in an open, honest, and dignified manner when they're not a good fit or when they've done something wrong. And so I even joke, we were talking about, our brand being when people exit. The way we exit people, even in situations where they did something that was flat out wrong, is a huge part of who we are, because everybody's watching. Everybody around you wants to know, are they going to be treated with dignity regardless of how they operate? So you got to believe it top down. If you don't believe culture matters, it's pretty hard to make an impact if the top people don't subscribe to that. Yeah. But if they do, you got to get to that point where you're really uncomfortable. You have that karaoke feeling. Maybe that's like anything. You got that karaoke feeling.
Especially when you got to be the first one to sing, man.
Looks like we made it. Look how far we go. Okay, I'm not going to do Shania, but
wow,
I might.
Impressive.
But that's the exact same feeling that you might get sometimes when you're like, all right, I know if I take this project, Lloyd would crush it. He knows everything about it. But if Lloyd gives it to somebody else who maybe doesn't know what they're talking about, it's a chance for them to figure out how to bring in resources, to cut their teeth, to get their nose broken, right? Sometimes you got to bloody your face a little so you can say, all right, next time I'm in this situation with this vendor, I'm not going to set myself up that way. I'm going to have a more honest conversation on the front end about what we're looking for. I mean, there's all these ways that you're not going to sink the ship with most of the decisions in your business. So be willing to take some losses, because it's growing people into being the leaders you need them to be, so that you don't you're additive to the business. You're not a liability, because you're not a necessity every day of every moment.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the goals of most entrepreneurs, is how can I work myself out of a job so that I'm not having to run the entire business all the time.
I'll go back to the carpool thing real quick. I handed over the reins for running carpool about 6 weeks after it actually got into operations, and had written from that moment on the biggest manuals you've ever seen, so that everybody would know everything I ever knew. So if I got hit, by a car, carpool would still be here. I shouldn't get hit by a car if you start a carpool. That's a terrible way to go, right?
Super strange. I won't even go where I was just going to go.
I know where you were going. Don't worry. It's already been set in your brain. But if you think about like what I was able to do for the next 2 years, both of my senior years of college after that, was to solidify some really big vendor relationships, or to get so deep into the insurance policies that we had everything we needed in place.
I got something for you.
Oh no! Oh, I thought it was a car horn at first. Now it's just me.
It's a funeral march. Dead at 21, the founder of Carpool.
Man, you're killing. Or you are killing
Sorry.
me on air.
Sorry.
Wow.
I had to.
Steve.
I had to. I can't hold back.
You're coming on my radio show soon, so watch what you say to me.
That's true. That's true. I
This
forgot
one's
about
first.
that.
He's gonna have you all set up.
So one of the things that, you know, I talk about a lot just because the business I'm in, but is the space, you know, and I've been in your space, and it's super culture based. I mean, you can feel it and see it when you walk in, and that area where you guys have that lounge area and the couches and stuff, and then just everything that's on the wall, how it's kind of open door with the glass on the private offices, so that the executives are right there in the mix. I know that's part of it, and certainly, Lloyd, with your business, it's probably 80% about the space and the feel and the look and the coolness factor and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
I got one question for you, and then I want to wrap up with you, because we're getting close to time. But tell me a time with your open door policy and the way that the office is structured, and then the way that you have laid out, like, there's no vacation time, no sick time. That doesn't mean there is none. That means you take as much as you want or feel like you need to, and whatnot. How often is that taken advantage of? And give us an example for an entrepreneur like myself, who I have a very strict vacation policy. Sure. Because I tend to be super lenient, and I get walked on a lot, and I don't know if maybe that's my leadership style or the culture that I've created in the company, but give me an example of what you've had to do, and I'm sure there's been some times where you've had to exit people.
Yeah. Well, first, the open culture, I've had somebody who walks out and talks about commissions because they're building the back office and they're using specific names and dollar figures, and I'm like, hey man, this is a private conversation.
Right.
You got to watch what people talk about.
Right.
Second is we're lenient about, I don't care if somebody's on Facebook at work, but then you realize somebody's peddling whatever cosmetic thing they're doing, and they're not good at supporting your salespeople, and you're like, you're putting your energy in the wrong place. So you just address it, and eventually, if they can't course correct. But what you really see is when people start to think, oh, you know what? Since there's no policy, I'll just take every Friday off. And it may not be every Friday, but 6 out of 8 certainly feels like every Friday. Yeah. And you can sense it because just like culture is palpable when you walk into a space, or you may know that a bar or restaurant is where you want to be by the way you walk in. You can also sense when you walk into a work group who's not carrying their weight or who is letting them down every single Friday. And so as soon as you recognize that, you do a quick poll, private poll, make sure you know what you're talking about. And then you sit down and openly and honestly, it's not an attack. It's, let me ask you a few questions. Let me find out where your head's at. Let me tell you what it looks like. Did you even know the perception of what's happening with you right now, the community conversation? And then you give people a gift. I'm going to give you a chance to redeem this, or consider this strike one, and, you know, this may not be the best fit for you. But people react to that. Very few people are out to, like, ruin my company by taking every Friday off. It's not a devious plan. Yeah. It's, a lot of them are just young or immature, or they're old and immature, and they just need calibration. Man, if I worked for a company like yours, I would take every Friday off for sure, man. And you'd be doing selfies on your motorcycle, and I'd be like, I know where Steve is. Absolutely. Yeah. I'd be peddling stuff on Facebook. I'd be doing all sorts of stuff at your office. Very little of it would be work. Yeah. No, that's great that you can, and I guess also you guys work a lot in teams, so there's probably that accountability piece too. Yeah. Where you're letting a lot of people down if you don't do your part. Yeah. So you feel that. It's, I always call it prison justice, that if we're going to do things as a team, you're either stepping up or you're going to get beat out. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Hey, so Lloyd, I know you don't know exactly what the next step is, and where you're going, but if you had to envision creating another bar, restaurant, entertainment venue concept, give me some of the things that you have in your mind of how you would like that culture, that look, that feel, that vibe. Wow. Have you thought about that yet? I just dropped that on you. Yeah. That wasn't one of the written down questions that I gave to you before the show.
I've thought about a lot of concepts and things that I want to do, that kind of stuff. I think one thing I've noticed, especially in the hospitality industry, is there's so many places and there's less and less employees, less people that want to work. You know, I don't know, maybe I'm not gonna go beat on the millennials, that kind of stuff, but there just seems to be less and less of them. Maybe just because there's so many places to work and so many opportunities now, that everyone I know who's in the hospitality industry will tell you the same thing, that employees are so much harder to find these days than they were 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 years ago. You know, I used to have 100 applications at any time, and now, before we closed the last one, it was, you know, when we had a position open, we were hunting people, like going out having to find people. But I think ultimately my goal is, if I could do that again, is, you know, I think it's said in a lot of businesses, but I really have always tried to create what I like to refer to as kind of the most dysfunctional family in the world, but still a family. You know, like, everybody's got their issues, everybody's got their thing, whatever, but when we're there together, we work hard as a team, and we work it, and because we work hard as a team, we achieve our goals as a team, and you know what? Everybody wins. And so, again, I say family all the time, family, family, and again, dysfunctional family, but again, family that we all agree on what we're doing. And I always try to give my staff tons of input, because the older I get, I'm like, I'm not cool. Maybe I was never cool, but I'm definitely not cool now. And I got kids that'll guarantee you that I'm not cool. But so I'm asking them.
I was cool for a while.
I used to too. Yeah.
Now I know the reality.
I gave it up. And when I was listening to Yacht Rock the other day, I knew I was not cool any longer. That was it. Game over.
I got slammed for watching Top Gun a couple of weeks ago and enjoying it.
Yeah. Saw it on TBS.
Everybody's been making fun of me. I'm like, it's a good movie then. It's still a good movie. Come on. It's like, you're not cool.
And here comes the remake. Yeah.
Exactly. Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Any flavor for us that you think might happen soon?
You know, I'm talking to a group of guys that I think is incredibly cool, and I hope it works out with them, just because I don't even know what all their goals are. They have a lot of property and a lot of things that they want to do, and a lot of things they've told me they would be willing to let me do, and most of all, though, they're just really cool guys. Like, they have a really cool concept, and the way they seem to meet every day at the end of the day and have a drink before they go home.
Pretty good idea.
And it's, you know, it's not that they're there because they're alcoholics, I don't think, but they're there because it's a nice way to end the day. And every day, it's not they're just there to have a drink. They meet and they discuss ideas. And they said, you know, some days we have 1,000 good ideas, and some days we have 27 horrible ideas. But either way, we sit there and we brainstorm at the end of every day for a quick hour, and then we go home nice and relaxed to our families or whatever. And I think it's cool. So I hope it works out.
Yeah. So maybe some of their thoughts with a little Lloyd Banks flavor.
I think they could use my touch. It'd
Cool.
be nice. Yeah. I hope so.
Awesome, man.
Nobody says flavor anymore.
Flavor. It's a flavor. I really look like an idiot now, but thanks, Jeff. You'll be invited back. Never. And don't worry, I can also do revenge on your radio show from the guest perspective.
I'm ready for you.
Yeah? Awesome.
Matt, mute button.
I think we're probably ready to wrap up, huh?
Sounds good to me. Good show, gentlemen.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it. Jeff, Lloyd, thanks so much for coming out. It was fun.
For having me.
All right. Talk to you
Appreciate
soon.
it.